Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is 5x5 and I'm Simo. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to click like and subscribe. We're back talking about Westworld again. So the second episode started off with Maeve. We're catching up with Maeve because she's pretty much absent in the first episode. She showed up in the end credits scene, but it was just kind of a tease into the second episode. So we're now catching up with her. She's in Nazi-occupied Italy from the looks of it. And it is Warworld. Surprise. So we get to see another one of the parks. While we are catching up with Maeve, and she's one of our pivotal favorite characters and main characters of the overall show, this is in a lot of ways a filler episode. We do see some characterization and there is some setup for the rest of the season, but not that much really happens. As I go through, I'll sort of flesh it out and explain what I mean when I say that. She wakes up in Westworld and she realizes that she's back in a park and back in a simulation again. But I mean, right away the audience is like, wait, are we gonna have to go through this all over again? We don't, thankfully. We don't have to live through the cycles of dying and waking up and dying. I mean, they do it in the episode, but she figures her way around pretty quickly, so it's not too much of a labor to watch. But that said, that is still the bulk of the episode, so not too much happens, and that's what I mean when I say it's a point A to point B episode. In between, we do get some good characterization, like she gets to get caught back up with Vittorio, and we also finish with some nice tidbits about understanding the simulation that she's in and the world she's in. It turns out it's a simulation. But like the first episode hinted at, she's in a simulation within the simulation. So Warworld is a completely simulated world as opposed to Westworld that had real life sets and actual physical constructs. The entire experience of Westworld apparently is completely simulated. They didn't stretch that mystery out at all. They kind of delivered it right away. We are seeing simulations within simulations. One of the clues to that was the freezing of time. So in previous seasons, when an operator paused the park, they would tell the host seize all motor functions and the host would freeze in place. But they were frozen in place using their motor functions in the real world. The host would be immobile, but their hair would still blow in the wind and whatever else. In Warworld, it's a complete simulation, so freezing all motor functions or crashing the simulation as what eventually happens, it results in everything being frozen. Things in motion, like bullets flying through the air or birds or whatever, everything freezes in midair because it's frozen at a point in time, because it's just a simulation and there's not intended to be any real world physics behind it. So that's a big clue. All right, so there were a few clues that the world Maeve is waking up to is also a simulation. So for example, she wakes up and right away she has Sylvester and Lutz working on her. And immediately this is familiar to the audience, obviously, but she wakes up and they don't recognize her. So that was clue number one. And when she tries to talk to them, they flip out. They don't recognize her in the sense that they don't recognize who she is to them or any personal relationship that she had to them previously. So these were all kind of clues. She also interacts with Lee Sizemore. He comes in and he recognizes her and he kind of calls off security, but he also doesn't really acknowledge the depth of the relationship that he had formed with her in the previous seasons. So these were all kind of clues that these were not really Lee or Lutz or Sylvester. So I feel like the audience, it was pretty clear. So I feel like the audience was able to pick up pretty quickly that something wasn't right and this was probably a simulation within a simulation. I don't know. I pieced it together really quick, but it is what it is. So as Maeve navigates Warworld and finds her way out of that simulation, she works her way through this cycle of waking up in the simulated Delos lab and then dying, well, getting put back into a body in Warworld and then dying and waking up, and she sort of navigates this cycle pretty quick, so we don't have to go through it, and it's not too much of a labor, like I said. We do learn a few things in the process about the way that the simulations and the parks are working at this point, so we have a few clues we'll be able to sort of suss out and figure out how they work. For example, the timing thing, like freezing all time versus freezing just physical motion of the hosts. We now know to look for that. So it's not a total waste going through this cycle. They've given us some tools to recognize things in the future. In the end, once Maeve sort of navigates her way out of Warworld and eventually crashes the simulated Delos lab as well. She is able to engineer an escape for her sphere, her control module. She identifies the lab that it's being held in and stored in, and she takes over the body of a maintenance droid who tries to rescue her sphere and break out into the real world. It doesn't go very well, and she wakes up somewhere else. This is Surak's place. I'm a little unsure where exactly that is. He presents it as being the real world, but as I mentioned in my previous video, I'm a little unsure about the real world's authenticity itself as well. I'm still more inclined to think that Surak's world here is also another simulation, at least, or the real world that we're having presented to us is still future world. I'm still very much sold on it, and I didn't mention it in my last video because I forgot to, but I'm fairly sure that Caleb is actually also a host as well, and he's a host in one of the future world narratives also. We'll see how that pans out. I got a little off topic here on a tangent, but Maeve wakes up in Surak's world or lair or whatever you want to call it, and they have a bit of a conversation. So we're getting to a point now where we've now met the guy who's in charge of Rehobola, apparently in charge of everything in at least future world, possibly in the real world as well. That's all going to be fleshed out. The important takeaway here is they've had their meeting, and interestingly, Surak has operator control over Maeve despite all of her enhanced abilities. He's able to freeze her motor functions without any problems at all. We'll see how that plays out. The episode kind of leaves off on that cliffhanger in a way. But he's the one that's brought her into the simulation cycle, and he was doing it, I don't know, it's not entirely clear why he was doing that. We presume he was trying to get information out of her because the simulations kept asking her information about the Forge and things like that. They seemed like they were trying to pump her for information. So we'll see what he was trying to get out of her, but we know from his conversation, he flat out tells her that he considers Dolores a threat and he wants to recruit Maeve's help in taking out Dolores. So now we're queuing up for a classic good versus evil, black versus white, literally, conflict. We'll see how that goes though. One of the interesting notes while they were going through the cycle is the simulation cycle is they had some really cool cameos where we got to see the creators of Game of Thrones. One of the actors for Game of Thrones also had a cameo in there, I think. I'm pretty sure I recognize his face without the beard. And of course we saw one of the dragons in the lab, and this essentially confirms that there's also a medieval world out there somewhere too. So, or Game of Thrones is medieval world. Dun dun dun. That's the implication, but I'm sure it's just a fun implication. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I wonder who's real, though, if Game of Thrones is a world as well. Anyway, it's fun, right? It's speculation. And the other major occurrence that happens in this episode is actually Bernard. Bernard has made it back to the park, back to Westworld, and he's gone back to his old lab, and he's reunited with Stubbs. And Stubbs is having a bit of a bad day. He decided to try and destroy himself, and Bernard puts him back together, and they have a little bit of an exchange, and Stubbs wants to know why Bernard is back, and Bernard tells him he's looking for Maeve. He needs her help to defeat Dolores. So everyone's trying to defeat Dolores, and everyone needs Maeve's help to do that. Sure, okay. Bernard decides to take Stubbs with him out into the real world to find Dolores and try and stop her. He reprograms Stubbs so that he can do that. That's essentially what happens in the episode, though. Like I said, it's not a really deep or riveting episode. It's pretty straightforward, point A to point B. A few important nuggets of information and some nice characterization, but it's mostly just a fun episode, and it's mostly, I would say, a filler episode. That's about it. So on that note, I'll wrap up for now. So as always, let me know what you think of the video and the episode in the comments below. Don't forget to click like and subscribe, and click the bell for notifications so you're notified when a new video is uploaded. Thanks everyone. I'll see everyone soon. Take care.